Candace Parker didn't settle for a name. She broke down the entire system behind the debate. While Aliyah Boston leaned confidently into Caitlin Clark's resume and experience, Parker pulled back the... She wasn't just comparing Clark and Bueckers. She was questioning how we evaluate talent in the first place. System fit, mental resilience, long-term adaptability. Those were her benchmarks. She emphasized how injuries, role design, and development paths shift outcomes in ways fans rarely acknowledge. Her take wasn't about choosing a favorite. It was about respecting how complex greatness really is. This approach gave the debate its depth. Parker brought in context from past rookie classes, emerging talents like Malona, and the evolution of careers over time to show that matchups are just the surface. Meanwhile, Boston's choice of Clark served as a reminder that real-world experience and chemistry can't be overlooked. Their combined perspectives pushed the conversation beyond the binary and into a real analysis of what excellence looks like when everything's on the line. Candace Parker and Aliyah Boston knew exactly what they were doing when they opened up the Caitlin Clark versus Paige Bueckers debate on their podcast.
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
This wasn't a casual who's your favorite conversation. It was a full-on breakdown between two players who've been at the highest level, talking about two of the most polarizing and electrifying names in women's basketball today. And when pros like Parker and Boston speak, the entire basketball world stops and listens. This debate didn't come out of nowhere. It's been simmering for years. From high school rankings to college dominance, Clark and Bueckers have been compared at every step. Their fan bases are passionate. Their styles are completely different. And now that both are entering the pro conversation, the tension has reached a boiling point. So when Boston firmly backed Caitlin Clark, it wasn't just a hot take. It was a moment. She didn't hedge. She didn't waffle. She said what she said. Clark's shooting, her basketball IQ, and her ability to consistently control a game puts her at the top. And that opinion wasn't just personal, it was informed. Boston has played with Clark. She knows what she brings in the huddle, how she reads defenses, and how she shifts entire game plans just by being on the floor. There's a difference between watching someone rack up stats on TV and seeing them operate inside the system. Boston's perspective has depth. She sees Clark's game from inside the WNBA grind, where the margin for error is razor thin and everything is earned. That's why her take hits differently. It's not noise. It's experience. But Candace Parker didn't just co-sign and move on. She complicated the conversation in the best way possible. Parker brought decades of context, showing how greatness isn't linear. She didn't pick a side as much as she zoomed out, explaining that comparing players like Clark and Bueckers without considering system fit, development environment, and long-term projection is missing the point entirely. She mentioned Dominique Malona, another rising star who isn't in the mainstream yet, but could be a generational talent if developed properly. That alone tells you where Parker's mind is. She's not stuck in the moment. She's always thinking 10 years ahead. That's what made this debate so different from a usual social media discourse. It wasn't about who went viral this week. It was about who's going to define the next decade of women's basketball. The analysis went deep. Not just Clark scores more or Bueckers has better court vision. They got into the mechanics, shooting range, mental toughness, how players process information, how fit and function inside a team structure can elevate or limit a player's potential. These are the things fans don't always see when they're arguing over box scores. And that's exactly why these conversations are so important. Aliyah Boston didn't say Clark is perfect. She said Clark consistently performs and impacts the game in ways that go beyond the stats. Parker didn't say Bueckers is overrated. She said Bueckers might be the kind of player who shines brightest in the right system, something fans often overlook in head-to-head comparisons. They also brought up other players, Angel Reese, Kiki Iria, Sonia Citron, Rakia Jackson, and used them to show how matchups work in real life. A sprint to 21 in a pickup game? Not the same as 4 quarters of playoff basketball, with defensive rotations and coaching strategies. The real test of greatness isn't flashy. It's consistency under pressure. It's how you perform when teams have scouted you for weeks. And it's how you lead when you're being doubled every possession. That's where Clark's impact stands out. According to Boston, Clark doesn't just get her own shots. She creates opportunities for everyone else. Her presence changes spacing. Her shooting threat draws defenders out 30 feet, opening up driving lanes for teammates. That's not just scoring. That's gravity. And it's why so many defenders are stuck in no man's land whenever Clark has the ball. Parker, ever the analyst, kept the conversation honest. She brought up how long-term potential isn't always obvious. Some players dominate early and fade. Others take time and grow into their roles. She pointed out that injury history, coaching changes, even team culture can completely reshape a player's arc. That's why she's not so quick to crown anyone. She's seen too much. She knows how fast hype can evaporate when the system fails the player. This level of realism is needed because so many fans fall into the trap of thinking that one game, one clip, or one season defines a player forever. Parker and Boston showed that the elite players, the ones who last, are the ones who evolve, who adjust, who understand that greatness is built over years, not trending moments. That's the backdrop for this entire debate. Clark versus Bueckers isn't about who's better in a vacuum. It's about how we define excellence. It's about how different styles can both be dominant. Clark plays like a modern-day volume scorer with an unreal shooting ceiling. Bueckers is a throwback to the fundamentally sound, floor general archetype. Both can lead a team. Both can be MVPs. But their paths and what they require to thrive are not the same. And that's where fan debates fall short. They try to rank players as if greatness is a checklist. Parker and Boston reminded everyone that it's way more complex. They weren't afraid to say it depends. Because it does. What system are you in? What's your supporting cast like? Are you being asked to carry the scoring load or control the pace? Are you healthy? Are you developing under the right coach? These are the variables that shape legacies, and ignoring them just leads to bad takes. This entire conversation wasn't about tearing one player down to lift another up. It was about respecting the process, respecting that Clark and Bueckers are both elite, just in different ways, and respecting that professionals see the game in layers that fans often miss. The fact that this podcast even happened is a sign of how far women's basketball has come. The discourse is maturing. The audiences are more engaged. And the players are now part of the analysis, not just the subjects of it. Parker and Boston showed that the future of basketball conversation isn't just about numbers. It's about understanding context, growth, and potential. It's about real evaluation. And most importantly, it's about pushing the game forward by thinking critically and speaking honestly. So where do you stand? Is Caitlin Clark's offensive firepower enough to crown her the top prospect? Does Paige Bueckers' court control and basketball IQ make her the long-term favorite? Or do you agree with Parker that the real answer lies in fit, development, and time? Jump into the comments and let it be known. Hit like if you're here for thoughtful basketball conversation. Share this with someone who only watches the highlights and needs a deeper take. And be sure to subscribe because these debates aren't going anywhere. They're only getting louder, smarter, and way more impactful. Just like the women who are leading them. Let's be honest. What Candace, Parker, and Aliyah Boston did wasn't just start a debate. They elevated it. They took a conversation that most fans keep at the surface, who's better, Caitlin or Paige, and injected real basketball insight, actual nuance, and years of experience into it. Because when you've played at the level they have, when you've lived the grind, your words carry weight. This wasn't hot take territory. It was masterclass energy. And the fact that it sparked controversy only proves how necessary it was. Because what they said, the way they said it, cut through the noise. Aliyah Boston didn't hesitate. She said Caitlin Clark. She said it plainly, clearly, and unapologetically. Not because she dislikes Paige Bueckers. Not because she was chasing headlines. But because she's on the court with Clark every day. She sees the repetitions. She hears the communication. She watches how defenses adjust, How coaches scheme entire game plans around stopping one player. That's real-world perspective you can't Google. Boston sees what Clark does that doesn't show up on a stat sheet. The split-second reads, the spacing manipulation, the ability to not just hit logo threes, but to force defensive rotations that open up teammates. She's not guessing. She's experienced it. And yet, what made this so valuable was that Candace Parker didn't just jump in and agree. She brought balance. She reframed the question. Parker wasn't just thinking about today. She was thinking 5, 10 years out. She challenged everyone watching or listening to think beyond who scores more. She talked about development arcs, player ceilings, longevity. She questioned how we assess greatness, not just in real time, but as a career unfolds. That's what separates analysts from casual fans. Candace didn't say Paige Bueckers was better. She didn't say Caitlin Clark was overhyped. She said, let's talk about fit. Let's talk about system. Let's talk about how two players with elite talent can have completely different outcomes depending on where they land, how they're coached, and how they evolve. Because it's true, context matters. Some players thrive in freedom. Others flourish in structure. Caitlin is an instinctual scorer who can blow open a game with raw momentum. Paige is a high-efficiency, high IQ guard who plays like a surgeon. Neither is better in a vacuum. But depending on the system, one might thrive while the other struggles. That's not about skill. That's about situation. Parker also made a point that fans often overlook. Development is never guaranteed. Injuries happen. Coaching staffs change. Chemistry fluctuates. One player might peak early and plateau. Another might take time, then explode once they're in the right environment. And that is why Parker brought up Dominique, because Malone is a reminder that the pipeline is deep. She might not have the hype of Clark or Bueckers right now, but Parker sees something long-term. That tells you this conversation wasn't about who's trending. It was about who's lasting. And that's the bigger takeaway here. Greatness isn't built overnight. It's built in the gaps, in the parts we don't see, in the quiet film sessions, in the reps after practice, in the games where you go 3, 4, 12, but still make the right pass when it matters. That's why both Clark and Bueckers belong in the conversation. They represent different ends of the spectrum, but they both move the game forward. And that's why the sport needs this kind of discourse. Because this isn't about tearing one player down to hype another up. It's about understanding that greatness is plural. It comes in many forms. And sometimes the best thing we can do as fans is appreciate the differences rather than trying to flatten them into a scoreboard. Look at what this conversation did. It opened the door for deeper discussions about system fit, long-term development, role adaptability, and even matchups that extend beyond just Clark versus Bueckers. They started talking about Angel Reese versus Kiki Iria. They brought up Sonia Citron and Rakia Jackson. Why? Because all of these players exist in a complex web of potential, pressure, and progression. And when pros like Candace and Aliyah speak on that, they're not just talking to each other. They're giving us a better lens. They're saying, don't just tell me who scored 30. Tell me who made the right help rotation. Tell me who called out the backdoor cut before it happened. Tell me who's reading the game like a chessboard, not just reacting to it like a sprint. That's the level of detail that fans deserve if they want to understand where the game is. Because let's not ignore the bigger cultural moment either. This isn't just a sports conversation. It's a branding conversation, a legacy conversation, a narrative conversation. Clark and Bueckers aren't just athletes. They're figureheads now. They're carrying the weight of rival fan bases, social media discourse, corporate endorsements, and cultural expectations. Clark is the lightning rod. Her games break records. Her style is disruptive. She's loud, fast, and unapologetically high volume. She draws defenders 35 feet from the hoop and still lets it fly. She's marketable, polarizing, and absolutely box. Bueckers is the quiet killer. Calm, calculated, less flash, more function. She's been through injury, through adversity, and come back with that steady, surgical approach that coaches love. She plays like she's always 2 moves ahead. That kind of presence doesn't go viral as often, but it wins. And in the end, that's what this is really about. 2 elite players pushing the game in different directions. Both valid, both exciting, and both necessary. What Parker and Boston did wasn't just give us an answer. They gave us a framework, a blueprint for how to have these debates with integrity, with respect, with actual analysis instead of noise. And that is what the game needs. So as fans, we have a choice. Do we reduce these players to numbers and TikTok clips? Or do we rise to the level of the conversation being modeled by Parker and Boston? Do we talk about range and efficiency? Or do we talk about vision, adaptability, and long-term fit? Because these players aren't one-dimensional. The conversation shouldn't be either. And the truth is, this kind of conversation isn't just good for the game. It's essential for the game. Because when you have Candace Parker and Aliyah Boston, the face of one generation and the rising force of the next, sitting down to dissect talent with clarity, honesty, and zero sugarcoating, you're witnessing the evolution of women's basketball in real time. They're not just offering opinions. They're shaping the narrative. They're pulling the conversation out of the shallow end and dropping it right into the deep water. And fans, whether they realize it or not, they're being challenged to grow too. Because this Clark versus Bueckers debate isn't about choosing your favorite and defending her like it's a fandom war. It's about learning to see the full game, understanding how different skill sets impact a team, recognizing that some players dominate through sheer force, while others control a game so quietly you don't even notice until they've already won. Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers are not the same player. That's the point. They shouldn't have to be. Clark brings chaos. She's unpredictable, high volume, always on the edge of either a game-winning dagger or a turnover that'll blow up the possession. And that volatility? That's what makes her thrilling. Defenses panic. Crowds erupt. Viewership soars. She's the kind of player who breaks rules and makes new ones as she goes. And guess what? That's hard to coach against. It's even harder to replicate. It's why Aliyah Boston backed her so hard. Because when you live that, when you've played next to it, when you've seen how one player changes the geometry of the floor, you know it's real. It's not theory. It's not potential. It's proof. But here's where Paige Bueckers makes things interesting. She plays like she's seen the ending already. There's no panic, no rush, just pace, poise, and perfect reads. She dissects defenses with precision. She knows where her teammates need to be before they do. And while she may not take as many heat-check threes or show up in every headline, she doesn't need to. Because her impact is systemic. She runs the machine. She doesn't just plug into it. And if that doesn't grab the average fan's attention the way Clark does, that says more about the fan than the player. Candace Parker knows this. You could hear it in how she spoke. She's been that player. She's seen what hype does to perspective. She's also seen how quickly the narrative changes when someone steps into the right system and suddenly becomes unstoppable. That's why she didn't commit to one side. Not because she couldn't make a decision, but because she knows better than to oversimplify something so layered. Her analysis was about patience, about seeing the long game. She's watched careers rise and fall. She's watched sure-thing rookies fizzle out because they were never given the space to grow properly. She's watched overlooked players thrive because they were trusted, developed, and given the right role. That's what makes this debate so much bigger than who's better right now. It's about who's going to last, who's going to evolve, who's going to weather the hype cycles, the injuries, the coaching changes, and still be here, still dominating 5 years from now. That's why Parker brought up Dominique Malona. Not because Malona is a household name, yet, but because that's where the game is headed. The next wave. The players who may not be the center of the conversation now, but who could redefine it entirely once they're fully developed. And that's the kind of thinking women's basketball deserves. This isn't just about elevating the top 2 names. It's about broadening the conversation. It's about acknowledging that greatness exists on multiple timelines. And that sometimes the most powerful players aren't the ones we're watching right now, but the ones developing just out of... Still, let's not pretend the Clark versus Bueckers rivalry doesn't mean something. It absolutely does. It matters that we're talking about them this way. It matters that there's enough attention on the women's game for this conversation to spark widespread reaction. That's not drama. That's growth. It means fans are engaged. It means people care. It means that the game has arrived at a point where its stars are being scrutinized, dissected, and debated with the same passion as their male counterparts. And that's a win for everyone. Because let's be clear, Clark and Bueckers aren't just elite players. They're brands. They're leaders. They're culture shifters. They represent different aesthetics, different approaches, different fan bases. And that's not a divide, that's diversity. It's healthy. It means the game has range. You want to root for the fiery shooter who plays with swagger and scores from the parking lot? Clark's You prefer the quiet assassin who lets her game speak and breaks down defenses like a surgeon? Bueckers is right there. Both exist. Both matter. Both are building the future in different ways. And that's why what Parker and Boston did was so valuable. They didn't argue for the sake of arguing. They didn't pit the players against each other to go viral. They brought real context, real nuance, and real respect into the conversation. They treated the game and the players like they deserve to be treated. Like professionals, like leaders, like pioneers in a sport that's finally getting the spotlight it's earned. So now that you've heard from the pros, what do you think? Has Boston's firsthand view of Clark swayed you? Did Parker's long-term vision make you reconsider your take? Or are you still riding with your pick, knowing that this debate, and the ones that will follow it, are part of what makes this new era of women's basketball so exciting? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This conversation's not done. It's just getting louder. Like this if you're here for the rise of women's hoops. Share it with someone who needs to upgrade their basketball IQ. And hit subscribe, because the game is changing fast, and we'll be here for every shot, every rivalry, every evolution. Stay tuned.